Let's head over to Ukraine for the latest developments on the ongoing conflict over here. So I want to give credit to journalist Sarah Rainsford for her article on this story talking about Ukraine and their lack of recruits and conscription. Apparently, Ukraine is exhausted, folks. They're short on men and equipment and ammunition. They're short everything. And so much to the point that they're putting out conscription teams going from city to city looking for military-age men, having them identify themselves and why they're not in a uniform right now. It's gotten so bad that the local social media channels have erupted on their own, identifying these conscription teams when they arrive in town, warning the young men to avoid them, giving location as to where they're at and how to go around them, or just don't go outside while these men are in your city. This is the point that Ukraine is at in terms of manpower. Everybody has left or is already in the army on the front line or wounded in the hospital. The few people that they have remaining are simply not enough to win this war. And this was brought to head by young men like Paavo here, who was in the Ukraine army on the day 2 years ago when Russia invaded. He was stationed north of Kiev, and he was part of the team repelling and defending Kiev from that push in the early part of the war towards that. And with his success there, he was later rotated east into the Donbass, where he saw even heavier fighting. And eventually his team was moved into Bakhmut. And after that second movement, his team was eventually hit by an artillery shell that wiped out his whole team and severed his arm below the elbow, as you see here in this picture. So after he was hit by the artillery shell, he hid in place in a bush until he was found, either by the Russians or by the Ukrainians. Thankfully for him, the Ukrainians found him, took him to a hospital where he recovered. So what does he do now as an injured veteran, still active duty in the Ukrainian army during a time of war? Well, he's part of the conscription teams going around the country looking for conscripts and recruits for the military. And this story isn't just about his background and how he got to this point. It's really about how he is shocked that as he does his new job as an injured veteran looking for recruits, people are avoiding him and going about their daily lives around him as if there's no war in his country. He is finding this shocking that while he's in a city like Kyiv, just 100 kilometers or more to the east, there's a horrible war going on inside the country of Ukraine, but the people living out their daily lives in Ukraine seem oblivious to this. It's like a disillusion of reality to them. And so here he is coming back from the horrors of war after more than a year of it himself, seeing it and seeing the rest of the country, at least in the city he's in, act as if everything's fine. So there's a real disconnect in the populace between the reality of war and the people coming back from that with all the PTSD and baggage that brings, and the people living relatively normal lives in a country that's at war. Another story is Sergei here. He was not in the Ukraine army whenever the Russians invaded, but he was in a territory that was rapidly overrun in the first couple days of the war. So he was in occupied eastern Ukraine. Eventually, the Russian forces did find him. Whether they thought he was in the army or not, they did not care. They took him from the parents that he lived with and kept him in a basement of a building. And according to him, they beat him and tortured him regularly until he could eventually escape back into Ukraine-controlled territory off to the west. Once he was back in that territory, he did volunteer for the army, where he could at least have a gun and fight back, and joined the army. Unfortunately for him, he was sent to a city in eastern Ukraine called Avdiivka, and that's where he lost his leg and is recovering in a hospital now, unfortunately. But that's his life story. That's how quickly this all began. Sent this young man into a basement being tortured, where he eventually escaped, went back to fight for his country, and was a casualty of war. Very sad. Today's video is really about the city in which he lost his leg. This city is being captured. It's embroiled right now between the Russian forces and the Ukrainian forces. The Russian forces have done a massive man wave push into the northern part of the city, and they've made progress. They've managed to capture the key rail line that is in the northern part of this Ukraine city. And what's important about this city is that it also has a massive coke plant that is in Ukraine occupation right now. And coke is essential for supplying the war effort of any country. Because with coke, you can make steel, you can make water purification devices and filters, and it's a key part of making acetylene, which is used for cutting and welding. So that coke plant is of immense strategic value to both sides, and it's in danger of being overrun by wave after wave of Russian forces because Russia has a near 8-to-1 man advantage on the battlefield compared to the Ukraine forces. And that number, that 8-to-1, is coming from the forces on the ground. That's what they're seeing happen. So they're just being overwhelmed at this point. And this city is the current one that's embroiled on this. And Russia is making steady progress. So that has all led to this. Enter Ukrainian General Alexander Syrsky. He is the new Ukraine military chief. The President Zelensky, president of Ukraine, has fired the old chief and put in place this one. He was in charge of the armed forces in eastern Ukraine for the past couple years, and now he's in charge of the entire military as of this week. Like I said, he's 58 years old. He's an old Soviet-style leader. He does not adhere to NATO strategy. He's a Soviet strategy type of person, completely different than what the old general was doing. So they're hoping this change in leadership and style will lead to victory. But we've already seen a sharp decrease in morale in the troops on the front, according to their social media post. They're posting on social media forums like X, putting out their opinion about this leader. Some of it are very direct, saying, "We're fucked," quote and unquote. So Syrsky, basically, he's not a good general, but he is a very good tactical platoon level leader. And because he was very good in that early position is why he rose through the ranks. But this man's military skill never developed beyond that lieutenant level of vision of battling in the immediate area. He never saw in his own mind, even though he rose to the rank of an operational commander, to see more than just the fight in front of him. And now he's in the elevated strategic position, making decisions for the entire Ukraine military. So I would agree with the assessment of the Ukrainian troops on the ground. They truly are fucked. This general's no-step backward orders and mentality towards warfare in Bakhmut over the last 2 years has led to that region being destroyed and costing the lives of key Ukraine military units. So all they've managed to do in the Bakhmut region is delay Russian gains with the occasional counteroffensive. I'll give them credit for that, but it hasn't led to the end of the war or the cessation of action anywhere. And as Ukraine continues to lose these key troops that they can't afford to lose, Russia is simply pushing more and more men into the battle. This man has cost too many lives of Ukrainian soldiers, and it's now killing their morale because he is now in charge of all of them. So this general with a lieutenant's perspective is calling the shots on Ukraine's strategy. And why would the president of Ukraine make this change? What happened? Well, this is General Valery Zaluzhnyi, if I'm saying his name right, pardon if I'm not. He was replaced for making statements recently about recruitment, about how he doesn't have enough troops. They've lost too many men on the front line because they didn't give ground like they should have and made firm fixed positions at a range or an area where they could actually defend against Russian troops instead of bleeding for 2 years in Bakhmut, for example. So he complains about the not having enough people, of course, the shortage of ammunition, and the weakening support essentially from the West. He's calling that out as well and saying the war is now at a state of stalemate and we should look for other solutions like ceasefire and a peace agreement. And by making these statements, by saying the obvious and the truth, he began becoming popular politically. And this is where Zelensky could not have that. And I believe this is where he led to Zelensky's decision to remove this man, is not only did he speak the truth publicly, he was becoming popular. And this man could be the next president of Ukraine after the next election. So Zelensky fired him I believe, on those grounds. So now you better understand the decision makers in the Ukrainians' defense, the new leadership decision that was made, why it was made, and how it's going to fail. I've told you this is not going to work. And as an amateur observer, I'm certainly no expert in strategic or land warfare at all. But I don't understand is why, after 2 years of conflict, there are still railways connecting vital Ukrainian cities all the way to Russia. Why are there numerous natural gas pipelines connecting Russia to Romania going through eastern Ukraine? Why haven't those been sabotaged, bombed, or disrupted in some way? And for the love of God, why is there still a Kerch Strait bridge standing? It has been attacked at least twice, and yet it still hasn't been taken down despite having the capability of doing it. They have the long-range artillery now, including the cruise missiles and drones that could attack all of these critical lifeline infrastructures repeatedly, keeping supplies disrupted. And they haven't done that. They have Ukraine has strategically fought this war as if they're going to win with these infrastructures in place. And what they're finding is they're going to lose with these infrastructures in place because they've spent all their men in the last 2 years under this guy's leadership, the new leader, in eastern Ukraine. And that is why Ukraine will eventually fall, just due to lack of men. And of course, ammunition and supplies along with that. But men is the most crucial thing. And this feels like a long way away from when we talked about Ukraine destroying the Russian fleet with cruise missiles and unmanned sea drones, which is a crazy story in and of itself. So if you want to watch that video, watch this right here.